At 96, the legendary Clint Eastwood is finally peeling back the layers on one of Hollywood's most iconic and mysterious friendships. We are talking about his complicated bond with Gene Hackman. After decades of keeping things tight to the vest, Clint is revealing details that will leave you absolutely speechless. So what exactly has he been hiding all this time? We are diving into everything from the untold stories on set to the heartbreaking real reason they eventually drifted apart. You better get ready, because this revelation is the kind of shocker that changes how you see these two titans. It all started with a first meeting on the set of The Beguiled. Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman's paths first crossed back in 1971 during the production of that intense Southern Gothic drama set in the Civil War. This project marked the first time they would share a credit, but the tension between these two powerhouses began simmering long before the cameras even started rolling. In the film, Eastwood took on the starring role of John McBurney, a wounded Union soldier who gets taken in by a group of repressed women at a secluded Southern boarding school. Although their characters did not share a massive amount of screen time, Hackman was there too, playing a smaller soldier role. But even then, behind the scenes, things were getting complicated fast. Both Eastwood and Hackman were famous for their iron wills and their radically different opinions on what constituted a great performance. You had Eastwood, the former TV cowboy who played the tough guy with a minimalist approach, relying on his rugged looks and stoic attitude to convey emotion without saying a word. He was all about efficiency and keeping things straightforward, no fuss, no mess. On the flip side, Hackman was renowned for bringing a volatile intensity and a heavy emotional charge to every single part he played. He loved diving deep into the psychology of his characters, delivering performances that were layered, intricate, and mentally exhausting. Naturally, the two actors clashed over these opposing methods. Eastwood, who was used to running the show his way, just could not understand Hackman's more deliberate and overly sophisticated acting style. Meanwhile, Hackman looked at Eastwood's style and thought it was too basic, lazy, and frankly underdeveloped. Despite their rocky beginning, both Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman were fighters who had to claw their way up the Hollywood ladder. Growing up in California, Eastwood was a bit of a nomad, travelling constantly with his family. And he was really into music as a teenager before he eventually stumbled into the acting world. However, he did not turn heads immediately. He had to grind until he landed the breakout role of Rowdy Yates on the hit show Rawhide. Years of playing the gruff, understated cowboy gave him a rock-solid foundation in acting. Gene Hackman, by contrast, came from a much more modest and gritty background. Born in San Bernardino, California, he was raised in a chaotic, dysfunctional home that left a mark on him. Hackman's road to glory started much later than Eastwood's. Before he ever committed to acting, he worked a string of odd jobs, hustling as a clerk and a messenger just to pay the bills. After finally getting some formal training at the famous Pasadena Playhouse, Hackman started earning small scrappy roles in various movies. His massive break finally came when he was cast in The French Connection, a gritty film that turned him into a superstar practically overnight. He became famous for portraying characters with incredible depth, since his realistic, hard-nosed approach was perfect for those demanding heavy roles. Eastwood, however, was always the quiet sword. He needed very little to get his point across effectively. His big break in Rawhide had taught him a valuable lesson: a competent actor does not need to overact or sell the part too hard. Like the legendary Dirty Harry, his characters were known for their grim, gruff, and emotionally detached attitudes. That was the quintessential Clint approach. Keep it quiet, keep it cool, and let the action speak for itself. By contrast, Hackman was the exact reverse of that philosophy. Creating people with massive internal depth was where Hackman truly excelled. He thought about every single moment and dug into the psychology of the person he was portraying. He was often the guy who would delve uncomfortably deep into the emotional aspect of a performance. He ensured that every movement and every phrase sprang from a place of real, raw feeling. This meant he wasn't always the silent, gloomy type that Eastwood was. Instead, Hackman was loud, forceful, and overflowing with emotion. Unfortunately, their dynamic on set suffered heavily from this clash in styles. Often using a more subdued style, Eastwood would just follow the script and let the imagery speak for itself. But Hackman would advocate for additional emotional depth, constantly questioning the motivations of the characters and trying to give the part more personal vitality. Their differing approaches occasionally caused some serious friction during the filming of The Beguiled. Their working relationship clearly revealed this conflict, since it was difficult for them to establish any common ground, making The Beguiled a battle of two strong personalities who butted heads just as much as they worked. At the time, Eastwood was just starting to cement his reputation as a top Hollywood leading man, while Hackman was still adjusting to the business, so they did not always see eye to eye. Although their different acting styles caused some heated arguments, it also signalled the start of a long-term and fascinating Hollywood rivalry. Even though they disagreed on method, Eastwood and Hackman deeply valued one another's skills. They might not have always agreed, but they couldn't deny each other's capacity to bring something truly unique to the profession. They were both known for their absolute unwavering commitment to their trade. Though it definitely wasn't easy, working on The Beguiled gave them a chance to improve their craft and maybe even learn a thing or two from one another. But while their on-screen rivalry and differing acting styles defined their early encounters, their careers would soon take very different paths, shaped by their personal ambitions and their unique approaches to fame. When it comes to navigating the treacherous waters of fame and keeping their personal lives under wraps, these two legends couldn't be more different. As their careers skyrocketed into the stratosphere, the paths of Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman began to veer off in completely opposite directions, proving they had very different end goals. Eastwood wasn't just satisfied with being a handsome face on the silver screen anymore. He had a hunger for something bigger. He had a burning desire to take the reins and personally oversee every single aspect of the movies he was part of. By the time the late 1970s rolled around, he had already started transitioning into a powerhouse, directing and producing his own films. His directorial debut came with the thriller play Misty for Me, which dropped right on the heels of his iconic career-defining performance in Dirty Harry. This move signalled the beginning of Eastwood's massive evolution from merely a leading man into a revered director who commanded respect. Clint kept expanding his footprint in the business, eagerly taking on tasks that would truly test his limits. But he didn't just stop there. He began supervising some of his own major initiatives, proving he was a force to be reckoned with. By the time the 1980s arrived, Eastwood was far more than simply an actor. He was an industry titan. He transformed into a visionary director, crafting cinematic masterpieces including Gran Torino, The Outlaw Josie Wales, and the legendary Unforgiven. These movies were pivotal because they allowed him to work with much more complicated characters and grander ideas, clearly demonstrating his incredible ability behind the scenes. Eastwood would go on to direct and create scores of celebrated movies, garnering massive praise from tough critics who finally had to bow down to his work. Having won prestigious Academy Awards for films like $1 Million Baby and Unforgiven, he officially proved he was no longer simply the rugged cop or the cowboy we all knew. He solidified his place among Hollywood's most revered directors. On the other hand, Hackman stayed strictly concentrated on the craft of acting, while Eastwood was busy spreading his wings into directing. Gene kept dominating the screen, playing pivotal parts in huge movies such as The Conversation and Hoosiers roles that brought him even more nominations and accolades to add to his shelf. The man was a chameleon, playing a wide spectrum of personalities, shifting effortlessly from a harsh, cynical officer to an emotional, inspiring sports coach. Hackman seemed perfectly glad to stay right in front of the camera where he felt most at home. As their careers shot forward, Eastwood and Hackman managed their glory in rather different ways. Eastwood was always a notoriously private person. He fought hard to keep his personal life totally off the public view and deliberately avoided the flashing lights of the Hollywood spotlight whenever he could. Honestly, this elusive nature could have been one of the key factors allowing him to maintain a thriving career for such an incredibly lengthy period of time. Eastwood was simply not one to play the fame game that so many others got lost in. He always preferred low-key settings where he could just be himself. He would much rather concentrate on his quiet family life and let his impressive career speak for itself without all the extra noise. Conversely, Hackman did not hesitate to take front stage and soak it in, but he was smart enough not to get caught and ensnared in the trap of celebrity either. Unlike Eastwood, he was noted for being a little more lively, social and vocal. Though he never let his love of performing take a back seat to the drama, Hackman definitely appreciated the notoriety and the accompanying benefits that came with being a star. He was known for always choosing jobs that genuinely intrigued him, rather than just following the huge payday which kept him grounded and laser-focused on his trade. While Eastwood was getting massive attention for his films and later for his directing prowess, Hackman was quietly becoming more and more respected as an actor's actor. He was constantly praised by peers and critics alike for his uncanny ability to play complex, multidimensional characters that felt real. Hackman actually had a bit of an underdog feel to him when compared to Eastwood's larger-than-life movie star status. They handled the crushing weight of fame differently, but both enjoyed long, successful careers, despite having clashing personalities that were polar opposites. Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman were both huge stars in Hollywood, but when it came to working together, things weren't always smooth sailing on set. Even though they have a deep mutual respect for each other as actors, their professional relationship was often marked by moments of serious tension and a major clash of personalities. The gritty Western Unforgiven stands tall as one of their most famous and intense collaborations to date. But behind the scenes, away from the cameras, there were plenty of moments that revealed the true complexity and friction of their bond. Unforgiven was a huge film that brought Clint Eastwood into the director's chair once again, and the stakes were incredibly high. Eastwood, who was already an established actor and filmmaker, by then decided to tackle a Western, but he wanted to do it with a serious twist. This wasn't just a typical shoot-'em-up cowboy movie, it was a gritty, dark and brutally realistic take on the Wild West that stripped away the glamour. Eastwood not only starred in the film but also directed it. The story centred on a retired outlaw, William Munny, played by Eastwood, who's called back into action to take on a dangerous final mission. Gene Hackman stepped into the boots of the corrupt sheriff, Little Bill Daggett, a terrifying character who embodies both absolute authority and sadistic cruelty. As you can imagine, a movie with this kind of subject matter was full of heavy, serious performances that required total commitment. Eastwood and Hackman's characters were on opposite sides of the law, which made their on-screen dynamic absolutely electric to watch. Their characters were tough, ruthless, and at times deeply flawed individuals. Watching them act together was like watching two unstoppable forces of nature collide head-on. But that intensity was just the surface. Off camera, things were a bit more complicated and the air was often thick with tension. Though they approached things in somewhat different ways, Eastwood and Hackman were both renowned for their strong will and great dedication to getting the job done right. Ever the consummate professional, Eastwood was a man who spoke very few words while he was working. He wanted things straightforward and disliked obsessing over his performances. He firmly believed that the action and feelings would speak for themselves without overthinking it. Conversely, Hackman was more methodically exact and detailed in his preparation. He enjoyed delving thoroughly into his characters, needing to know their backstories and motives inside and out, especially when he disagreed with something in the script. He was also somewhat more vocal about his opinions. Often this disparity in approach caused conflict on set as their styles grinded against each other. Eastwood was renowned for his reserved, quiet demeanour, while Hackman was more expressive and unreservedly expressed his ideas to anyone who would listen. Naturally, this creative friction led to some serious butting of heads behind the scenes of the Western classic Unforgiven. Down the road, Hackman opened up about how he and Clint didn't exactly see eye to eye on how to tackle specific scenes, especially when it came down to what really made their characters tick. See, Clint was all about that minimalist approach, keeping everything raw and grounded, while Gene was the type to push the envelope and dig way down into the psyche of the role. Even with their contrasting styles, there was a massive amount of mutual professional respect between these two heavyweights. They were both industry veterans who had clawed their way to the absolute summit of Hollywood, so they knew exactly what the price of success looked like. By this point, Clint was already a certified legend, known worldwide as an action icon and top-tier director, while Gene had a shelf full of trophies, including Academy Awards for his intense method-style acting. And make no mistake, when the cameras rolled on Unforgiven, both men were operating at the absolute peak of their powers. However, you can't put two alphas in a room without some sparks flying. Their distinct personalities created a simmering tension even amidst the admiration. There were moments where Clint felt Gene's high-octane, forceful delivery was just a bit too much for the subtle tone he was aiming for. Gene was the guy who wanted to dissect every single layer of a scene, always pushing for more depth, whereas Clint was famous for his efficient mentality, shoot it, keep it tight, and move on. Clint has always been notoriously protective over his directorial vision, so anyone trying to veer off the path he set was bound to ruffle some feathers. There is this one specific story floating around from the set that perfectly captures just how thick the tension got between the director and his lead villain. The scene called for Hackman to deliver a specific line of dialogue with surgical precision right in the heat of a dramatic confrontation. But Gene, never one to just phone it in, started riffing and improvising to add a little more flavour to the character, completely shifting the vibe of the action. Clint, who runs a remarkably tight ship, wasn't having any of it. He found the deviation totally unacceptable and cut the scene immediately. He kept his cool but was firm as stone when he told Gene that the line needed to be spoken exactly the way it was typed on the page. Now, Hackman was used to having a long leash creatively, so he didn't take kindly to being boxed in. The friction wasn't just about acting, it was a clash of fundamental philosophies. You have to understand, Clint has always been a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of guy, believing in discipline, grit, and doing things the hard way. Whether the cameras were rolling or not, he operated with a conservative mindset that valued simplicity and efficiency above all else. On the flip side, Hackman was much more open to the fluid nature of art. He was liberal in his thinking, always looking to explore the messy, complicated shades of grey in life. Believe it or not, even the age gap between the two legends added another layer of complexity to their on-set dynamic. By the time they teamed up for Unforgiven, Clint was settling into his early 60s, while Gene was still navigating his late 50s. It might not seem like a huge gap, but their life experiences and career trajectories had shaped them differently, adding fuel to the fire. Clint had been a fixture in the game for decades, already cemented as a director who knew exactly what he wanted. Meanwhile, Hackman was still obsessed with the craft itself, constantly refining his technique. They were just at different mental stages of their careers. Consequently, every interaction they had on set was coloured by these differing perspectives, with Clint firmly holding the reins of command. Gene was a natural disruptor, always ready to test boundaries and take calculated risks, which naturally created a tense atmosphere when facing a director who valued order. You had Clint's understated, ice-cold demeanour clashing head-on with Gene's fiery emotional intensity, really putting their professional bond to the test. When you have two immovable objects like that, neither willing to give an inch, that friction isn't just possible, it is practically guaranteed. The real question was whether this pressure cooker would refine their performance into gold or blow the whole production apart. Then came the long stretch of silence and the ever-widening gap between the two icons. After years of dominating Hollywood, both together and on their own tracks, Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman seemed to veer off into completely different directions as they aged. That intense collaboration on set faded into a deafening silence, with neither man acknowledging the other publicly for a long, long time. It was the beginning of a cold front in their relationship, coinciding with Hackman's gradual but total disappearance from the public spotlight. However, if you think the reasons for this drift were straightforward, think again. It was way more complicated than just a feud. It was a mix of personal evolution and professional shifts that steered each man down his own solitary road. Gene Hackman's exit from Tinseltown caught everyone off guard. After a legendary run with hits like The French Connection, The Conversation, and of course Unforgiven, Hackman made the shocking call to walk away from it all. By the early 2000s, Hackman was in his 70s and he made a life-altering choice. He decided to cash out his chips, not necessarily quitting the craft he loved, but escaping the suffocating pressure and fame that came along with it. There was no grand farewell tour, no tearful press conference. He just quietly slipped out the back door, focusing on finding some peace and quiet far away from the flashing lights. It left millions of fans scratching their heads, wondering whatever happened to the guy who was arguably the most intense performer in Hollywood history. The rumour mill went into overdrive, with some folks guessing he was just fed up with the industry, tired of trading his privacy for a paycheck. Others theorised that he was just over the lacklustre roles being offered to ageing actors and didn't want to tarnish his legacy. Whatever the real reason, Hackman's exit was shrouded in mystery, leaving a massive Gene-sized hole in the heart of the movie business. When he vanished into retirement, it felt like Hollywood lost one of its most magnetic and irreplaceable souls forever. While Gene Hackman pulled a vanishing act and faded into the shadows, Clint Eastwood's star only burned brighter. The man wasn't just acting anymore. He was a triple threat, producing, directing and writing his way into cinema history. He solidified his status as absolute royalty in the entertainment industry, becoming one of the most revered and powerful figures Tinseltown has ever seen. Stepping behind the camera, Eastwood tackled gritty, high-stakes projects that demanded attention, churning out massive hits like $1 Million Baby Gran Torino and the intense war drama American Sniper. While Hackman packed up and left the limelight behind, Eastwood was out there collecting trophies, earning respect not just for his signature scowls, but for his visionary eye as a director that kept the awards piling up. Even years after Hackman had gone completely radio silent and retreated to a quiet civilian life, Clint's trajectory shifted into overdrive, making him an even more dominant force who refused to let his name drop off the marquee. Yet, amidst all the applause and box office gold, you have to wonder if Eastwood felt the stinging absence of his old sparring partner. Hackman's sudden retirement was a harsh wake-up call, proving that Hollywood is a fast-moving train that will leave anyone behind, regardless of how much raw talent they possess. While business was booming for Clint, snippets from candid interviews hinted that the long stretch of silence between him and Gene was a bitter pill to swallow. To the outside observer, it looked like the bond between these two titans had turned absolutely glacial during this era. For years on end, you couldn't find a single photo of them together. No red carpets, no award shows, nothing. It wasn't necessarily some explosive rivalry or a massive scandal that tore them apart, but rather the simple, sad fact that their lives had drifted down completely different highways. Sure, they had butted heads and clashed egos on set back in the day, but the gap widened naturally as Eastwood obsessed over the director's chair, while Hackman vanished from the scene entirely. There was no screaming match in the press or dramatic breakup. It was just the inevitable result of two legendary actors following their own unique compasses. Whenever reporters grilled Eastwood about his past glories, especially those involving Hackman, he usually played it coy, offering little more than a shrug or a vague comment. Decades rolled by where it seemed both men were perfectly content to leave their shared history in the rearview mirror. Of course, this total lack of acknowledgement sparked endless rumours and gossip about where they actually stood with one another. Was there bad blood, or were they still pals? For the longest time, the truth was locked away in a vault, while fans were left guessing what really went down between the icons. But then finally came the big revelation. As Clint Eastwood moved into the twilight of his illustrious career, he started getting a bit more introspective, reflecting on the old days and the peers he came up with. In a rare turn of events, Eastwood actually began to spill the tea in interviews, opening up about Hackman and the reality of their time in the trenches together. He confessed that, personality clashes aside, he always held a massive amount of respect for Gene's sheer, unadulterated acting genius. Even if things got tense, personally, professionally, there was a profound, unspoken bond, rooted in their mutual mastery of the craft. Clint was careful to note that while Hackman's method was worlds apart from his own style, that difference didn't make it any less brilliant or effective. He even went on record acknowledging that teaming up for the masterpiece Unforgiven remained one of the absolute highest points of his entire professional life. Despite the headaches and the friction behind the scenes, you simply cannot deny the cinematic magic that sparked whenever those two shared the screen. Eastwood raved about how Hackman took the role of the villain Little Bill and transformed it into something far more menacing and complex than what was on the page. He realised that Gene's intense dedication elevated the entire film, delivering a performance that was layered, sophisticated, and utterly unforgettable. With the benefit of hindsight, Eastwood seemed to grasp that Hackman wasn't just a co-star. He was a crucial ingredient in some of the most defining moments of Clint's legacy. But it wasn't just about the work. Eastwood also got vulnerable and touched on his personal regrets. He admitted that once the cameras stopped rolling, he wished he had put in a little more effort to keep the lines of communication open with Gene. Those long years of silence made Clint realise that for all their professional admiration, they never really clocked in the hours to just hang out as buddies. There was a hint of frustration in his voice about how far they drifted, wondering if things could have been different had they fought harder to keep the friendship alive. Hackman's exit from Hollywood also forced Eastwood to take a long, hard look in the mirror and consider his own enduring legacy. Seeing a giant like Hackman voluntarily step out of the spotlight served as a heavy, sobering reminder to everyone in the business. It proved that no matter how many Oscars sit on your shelf, fame is fleeting and the applause doesn't last forever. While Eastwood's marathon career showcased his incredible ability to adapt and reinvent, Hackman's quiet retirement was a stark warning that every star's journey has a different expiration date. Even though Hackman's departure left a gaping hole in the industry, Eastwood seemed to genuinely respect his decision to bow out on his own terms. The industry suffered a massive loss when Gene Hackman hung up his hat, and not just because we lost a famous face. We lost a distinctive powerhouse approach to character acting that made his absence deeply felt, especially in those morally complex, sometimes downright wicked roles he mastered. Hackman possessed that rare, uncanny ability to make every single character feel terrifyingly real. He never backed down from a challenge, cementing his status as one of the most revered performers of his generation, thanks to that signature grit and realism. In a way, Hackman's absence only highlighted just how unique and enduring Eastwood's presence remained as he continued to dominate the box office. While fans everywhere missed seeing him on screen, Hackman's retirement was clearly a choice to reclaim his life far away from the flashing lights of Hollywood. And honestly, you have to give the man credit for walking away while he was still standing at the very top of the mountain. When you hear a legend like Clint Eastwood finally get candid about his old buddy and co-star Gene Hackman, it becomes immediately obvious that the bond these two icons share is genuinely one of a kind and runs far deeper than most fans ever realised. If you are looking to uncover even more unbelievable true stories and deep dives into Hollywood history just like this one right here, please go ahead and smash that like button, hit subscribe and turn on those bell notifications so you are always the first to know when we drop a new video.